Hey there, welcome to the Not Just Mama podcast, the show where we talk about building businesses, chasing dreams, raising little yous, and keeping it real through all the chaos. We're diving into mindset, motivation, and all things mompreneur life, all while microwaving our coffee for the 20 millionth time. I'm your host, Heather Madsen, a dream-chasing mompreneur who knows exactly what it's like to juggle big ambitions with a million daily tasks. Because let's be honest, we're not just moms. We're wives, we're partners, we're daughters, friends, creators, dreamers, and so much more. And just because we're raising little tiny humans doesn't mean we have to put our dreams on the back burner. We deserve to chase them, build something incredible, and make a difference, all while being amazing moms. So go ahead and nuke that coffee once again and get comfy, because we're diving in. Hey there. So today's episode is a little bit different than my other ones. And I've kind of been on this motherhood kick, which is cool, right? But I just wanted to share an experience I had this week. And I mean, it's a bit of a heavier topic, but I feel the need to share it. And so it's not going to be like super structured or anything like my other episodes, but I believe with everything in me that there is power in our truth. So this one's for the moms who are just scared to speak up in certain situations. It's for the ones who wonder if their voice even matters, okay? Because sometimes it feels like it doesn't. Like a lot of people have power over you, and that sometimes you are forced to just stay quiet. This is for the ones who have been burned before, because I just walked through something really, really hard. And it reminded me exactly why we have to speak anyway sometimes, okay? Even when we are shaking in our boots, our hands are shaking as we're about to speak our truth, right? And so with that, I wanted to share my recent experience with my children's school. And it's a place I worked at for 2 years on and off too. But honestly, it was once a school that I believed in, okay? And for me, it is important that my children get not only a good education, but something that is Christ-centered. And I know that might not be everyone's choice, and that's totally fine. I don't judge anybody for where they put their kids, but for my certain belief system and for my family, I choose to put my kids in a Christian environment, okay? And just given me and my husband's past experience and what happened to us, it has brought us to this point. So obviously, no judgment to anybody, right? Parents have the right to put their kids in whatever environment they want. But with that said, this is the school that I chose for my kids, and they've been going there for 4 to 5 years. And like I said, I worked there briefly. And the last year that I worked there was the toughest. I mean, I experienced so many different things, okay, within the staff and like the leadership itself. And, I'm not talking about every single staff member and every single person in leadership. I just want to set that straight. Not everyone fits into this story, okay? And I totally appreciate the staff members and the leadership members that had my back and were so supportive. And not only that, but I really give a lot of credit and I respect all the employees that were willing to give the children grace when they needed it and allowed them to be children. But as I said, I went through a lot of experiences working there. And when life got hard for me, this past year or so has been really difficult. I went through a lot of family trauma. I went through a ton of changes, and some family members even went through health problems. And it was just a lot, but I wanted to make a change in my life. So I pivoted and I went back briefly to an environment where I thought it would be encouraging and uplifting and, Christian-like. But instead, I walked back into the most toxic work environment I have ever faced in my life. And I'm not exaggerating. And not only was it toxic for staff members, but I believe it was very toxic for some families. Okay. I faced manipulation, favoritism at its best, betrayal, and stress so severe that I felt like it actually affected my physical health, okay? My stomach was constantly hurting. I constantly wanted to vomit, even though I never did. But I've never felt anything quite like that. And so a lot of stuff were building up since the beginning of the school year. And then one day my son was accused of doing something very serious, okay? And I took it seriously because when I was a child, I faced trauma and I just couldn't believe that my son was doing the very thing that traumatized me as a child. So I took it seriously and I took action immediately. And I applied appropriate consequences for my child. And what he faced as a consequence was just 3 days of in school suspension. And he suffered one whole day at this point, okay? And that night, I asked my husband to have one on one with him because this just felt not right. And I think that he needed that dad time. And dad was suspicious the whole time. He's like, I don't know about this, right? So he started asking my son some questions, and my husband actually demonstrated and asked him, okay, did you do this? And my son immediately freaked out. He was screaming and he was crying, and he said, no, dad, I would never have done that. I didn't do that. Believe me, I didn't. Okay. And I know my son. If he freaks out like that, and he's out of the two of my children, he will tell the truth first before the other, okay? So I know my child. Like, if he is freaking out, if he is crying over it, and he is trying so hard to convince you, I have always found in years past that when he does that, he is actually telling the truth, okay? So I immediately call some leadership in the school and I'm like, hey, we got to investigate this more because we have reason to believe that my son actually didn't do this, right? So the next day we go in and we talk to the parties involved, and turns out my son never did that. And I was so upset. Like, I was crying. I couldn't believe how this situation was handled. And I know some of my own trauma came back in that, but just I was so disgusted by how it was handled. And so I immediately went to a higher up and expressed my concern. And I also asked for confidentiality until I was ready to speak out because I was planning on writing a letter. And at the time, I was angry, right? I was angry at certain staff members and all that. And this was around Christmas time. But, I decided to wait it out and take a time to think about it and really give it to God. And in the end, I responded with grace. And I was like, I could write a letter about this person. But do I want to? No, I don't. Do I want to ruin my relationship with her? No. So what I did instead was I wrote a letter to the board and I expressed what I thought was wrong with our school system. And I gave examples of things that happened to me, but I didn't mention any names. But I wrote the letter in hopes that it would help improve the environment for both staff and students. And like I said, I never mentioned any names in my letter. I was trying to keep my own confidentiality, so I didn't sign the bottom. And there was only one board member that knew who wrote it. And I trusted them to keep my confidentiality. And in the letter, I asked for no punishment of any staff member. Like, that was not my wish. But instead, my identity was leaked, my words were twisted, and the staff member that originally caused the issue was reprimanded. And I mean, this was something I never intended with my letter. I was mad in the beginning, but at the point of me writing that letter, I was calm. And I didn't write my letter in rage. And what they told this staff member was not at all what I said. And so I let it go. Yes, I was mad, but I'm like, whatever. Okay. And I let it go. I don't hold on to things very often. But then something else happened. They hired a new staff member, and, being a Christian school, this person's conduct and character were misaligned. It was nothing that the school represented. And staff began to notice like really disturbing behavior. And some examples of this is they were yelling profanities in front of parents, they were vaping on campus, speaking poorly about staff in public places, lying repeatedly, refusing to pray with students, and just wearing inappropriate attire while working there. Okay. And I understand, like, yeah, I love wearing my leggings, but I never wore that stuff around the school while I was there. And these were just reports from staff members, and they were told to me. But I stood by and listened very silently because I'm not the kind of person who just takes what somebody says, okay? I have to see it for myself. So I gave this staff member the benefit of the doubt. But then this staff member made false accusations against me. And that was the point where I was like, okay, this is enough. If multiple staff members are saying something and then I experience it, that's something totally different. That's when, like, I can speak up and feel comfortable about it, okay? So I went around and asked each staff member if they wanted me to speak for them and what they would like me to bring up. And I wrote it all down. And I had like 5 pages of notes that I wanted to bring up to the board, okay? So I spoke before the board and I asked them not to interrupt me, but one of them interrupted me. But I spoke before the board and stood up not only for myself and my children who I was worried about, but for the students and staff who couldn't be there to speak for themselves, okay? And like I said, I had their permission. And what happened next was really repulsive. Like, I just couldn't believe it happened. But I was the one being interrogated. And our concerns, all the staff, they were dismissed. And they put a lot of blame on the administrator. And I was just in awe. I was just shocked. I could not believe what I was hearing and what was coming out of their mouths, okay? They defended everything for this staff member. And why? I don't know. But in the end, there was me talking and some family members. And so the board quietly removed this person from the classroom. Although they were not terminated, even though there was many reports made by staff and parents, okay? And it brought a lot of uproar and strife and suspicions from the board. And at this point, it was almost like they were trying to find anything they could on this one staff member that was reprimanded earlier this year. And they sure found something. It was not even anything worth firing this person over, but they in the end did get fired. And I tell you, in all honesty, it wasn't right what they did. They tapped into the school's cameras and they just tried to catch them red-handed, and they felt it was enough for termination. And it just wasn't right at all. And once they had fired this person, I resigned the same day because I could not stand for that. And I will not. I will always stand for what's right. And I let it go at that point. I decided that it wasn't worth fighting anymore, that my word was not worth anything. And honestly, I just needed to save my breath. Why stress about it anymore? Okay. So I resigned and I let my kids finish out the year. And despite all of that happening, I still tried to give it the benefit of the doubt. And I kept an application open for my kids to return the following year because I knew that I wanted to change something for my kids school-wise, but I wanted something as backup, like, okay, something to fall back on if things didn't work out for me, if I decided not to homeschool, okay? Um, but halfway through the summer, I get this email and it says, okay, my one kid got accepted, but I never got an email for the other one. And I waited a whole week to hear. And it turns out that the board decided to not let my child back. And I did all my research before even coming to this conclusion, but it was targeted. It was definitely targeted. And there's no other explanation because I talked to my son's teacher to get confirmation. I talked to a bunch of people, and my son has been going there for 5 years with absolutely no problems. And honestly, this school board has accepted students back into the school that had violent and behavioral issues. And my son had none of that. Yes, he's a boy. And he can be a lot at times. And yes, he disobeys sometimes, but he's corrected and he comes back to his senses and he's good. And not only that, but my son's a straight A student. I mean, he's hyper and he has a lot of energy, but despite all that, he always stayed on task and got his work done. And that's one thing his teacher has always said about him is that, like, he never really had to study anything that she tested him on. He could just not see his spelling words and then just take the test and he would ace it. That's how smart my son is. And so academically, he had no issues. But to look back and actually witness and watch the board accept students with violent and behavioral issues in the past, this really upset me. And honestly, it would have been easier to stay quiet, but easier doesn't mean it's right. So I wrote a review, and it was a very honest review about my experience and basically my opinion of the school all in all and what happened to me. And I did it with honesty, and I have a clear conscience about it. And, you know, there's always a fear when leaving a review, right? You're fearful of retaliation. You're fearful of being misunderstood by other people. And you're in fear of being that mom. But honestly, who cares? Let them think what they want to think. But it's really important that we stand up and speak our truth when things get hard, because guess what? Nothing is ever going to change if you do not speak up. And so I know that takes courage and integrity, and it's hard. But once you do it, it feels lighter. And if it feels heavy, it's because you weren't doing the right thing, okay? And there's a power in speaking up too. Because if you think about it, you as a parent, you're an example to your children. And if you stay quiet about everything, especially when it's wrong, are you a good example for your children? Are you showing them how to be the most powerful person you can be? Probably not, right? So it is really important to speak up when something's wrong, even if it costs you everything. And sometimes we fall into the thought that, okay, we need to be the perfect mom for our kids. No, you do not. And you're never going to be perfect. I'm sorry to break it to you. But your kids need a brave mother, okay? Truth telling is a part of being a leader, not only in your family, but to other people too, whether that's in business, family, or just a faith community, such as my children's school, okay? And yes, you might get a little bit of rejection. You might have some loss or discomfort in general, okay? And I definitely feel that. But you also gain a lot from telling the truth and speaking up when it comes to issues like this. You gain a sense of self-respect, a clear conscience, and peace, and leave it at that, and let God do the rest of the work. I shared something that I wrote on Facebook recently, and I got a lot of good feedback on it. And I wanted to share it with you today too, okay? Your hands are trembling, you're nervous, you're shaken by what's about to happen. You're about to speak your truth out loud in front of people who may not like what you have to say. People who have a say in what happens next. People who might twist your words, question your heart, or make you feel small in general. You have no idea how it will go. I mean, some are there encouraging you to speak, amping you up, not because they're brave enough to say it themselves, but because they hope that you will be. And you're scared, but you speak anyway. Because you remind yourself that you are brave, you are strong, and you're not just doing this for you. You're doing it for the ones who matter the most, your family, your children, and not just your children, but other people's children too. This is exactly how I felt before I stood up and made my stance to the board. Your children are the ones who look up to you, the ones who will one day say, "That's my mom," the one who stood for me when no one else did, the one who had my back even when it meant standing alone. Yes, I may be understood. I may be judged. I may lose some friends, comfort, or even my place. But I will never lose my purpose. And I will never twist my truth. Because my purpose is to be the mom who fights for her kids. The mom who protects when no one's watching. The mom who chooses courage even through fear. One day, my children will look back and say, "My mom was strong. She gave up her own comfort, her popularity, and her pride just for me." That's who I am. And if you're reading this, you can be too. What you do today echoes in the hearts of your children tomorrow and for years to come. Do what's right, even if it hurts, even if they hate you for it, even if your body trembles of fear like mine did, even if you lose your position because of it. Because what matters more? Your job or your circumstances or your family? For me, it's always family. Family comes first above all else. So stand up, speak out, be the example your kids will remember for the rest of their lives. Because one day they'll tell the story and you want them to say, she was brave, she was bold, and she was my mother. I don't know where you're at in your life right now, but maybe you're facing some sort of storm, some sort of problem, and you don't know how to get out of it. Maybe somebody's accusing you of something, or maybe you're just misunderstood. Maybe you have a truth that you were afraid to speak about, and maybe you feel that your voice won't matter. And I want to remind you that you're not alone. I encourage you to be bold and to speak out, to speak your truth, even if your nerves are going off like crazy, like mine did. What you say today could become the moment your children remember forever. Speak your truth, even though it's hard. Speak your truth, not because it's easy, but because it matters. And it can change the lives of not only your children, but for everyone else too. And it can encourage others to speak up as well. So I know that was personal and pretty deep, but it's been on my heart all week. It's caused me to feel very deeply and emotionally. And, things like this can take a big toll on you. And if you let it get to you, it will. But I encourage everyone to speak up, speak their truth. And not only that, but to speak their truth once and let God do the rest for you. Okay? You don't need to drag it on. You just need to speak the one time. And if you do it right and your words are powerful enough, it'll make a ripple effect for years to come. So I want to thank you so much for letting me share my heart today. And if this episode touched you, helped you, or reminded you of your own strength, and I know it's there, please take a moment to share it with another mom who needs it. And if you haven't yet, don't forget to hit that follow button so you don't miss the next one. You are strong, you are worthy, and your voice, it matters more than you know. Until next time, be bold, be brave, and be nobody else but you. And remember, you're not just a mom, you're so much more.